only well-established brands can survive in a saturated market. That is absolutely not true, and I'm going to talk you through why that is. Hello and welcome to Engage and Thrive, also known as EAT, your coffee catch-up with me, your host, Taelon, where we will go through common problems and hurdles that come up in business, marketing and advertising and try and demystify them. I know firsthand how complicated and confusing it can seem with all the different acronyms and all the things to do in business. So let me try and help you be better in business. First things first, let's start with grabbing a coffee. Let's start by myth busting. So the reason I'm going to say this, and this is a big sweeping statement, but there is no such thing as a saturated market on the basis of, if you've done your homework and your research, if you're a new brand or a smaller brand, typically you're a bit more agile to position yourself in a market. Yes, of course, established brands are going to have a potential stronger market share. But to give you a real life example, if you think of changing landscapes of markets, think of like ChatGPT. So Google dominated Google search, all the search, and then TikTok was dominating as a TikTok search, and then ChatGPT has come along. Firstly, they've dominated the space in terms of an AI, but actually now you read reports of they're dominating in terms of a search space. It could be challenged to say with TikTok, but to myth bust it is, and that's what I'm saying, it's a sweeping statement to say there's no such thing as a saturated market, because it really does depend on your target audience, who you're going after, your positioning and how you're doing it, which we'll go further into in the takeaways. So the next thing to go through is vocab. And the first one is obviously saturated. So saturated market. When people refer to this, they're talking about a market where there's lots of competition or lots of very similar products and services. So again, lots of examples is shoe brands or food brands. When I was at university, people used to talk about thinking of branding and branding positioning. If you're thinking about a loaf of bread, what's a differentiator with a loaf of bread? So when people are talking about a saturated market, it's about there's a lot going on there, or, well, it is saturated. The next thing to think about is value proposition. So this is essentially what makes your business, your company, different to anyone else, any other competitor. So when people talk about your USP, your unique selling point, it's that. So how do you actually position yourself for your target market as completely different to your competition? Then the next one to think about is your positioning statement. So again, this may be like a phrase or paragraph or sentence of how you position yourself in your market for your target audience, against your competitors, however it is, but that will be a statement typically that your marketing team may produce and you're all briefed on and become very familiar with. And so when people ask you about your product or service, you have that as your go-to phrase. And the last one to think about is your competitive edge. So this is what makes you different to the competition. So is it that you have different features? Is it that you have different flavors? What is it that makes you unique compared to your competitors? So slightly different to your unique selling points, but it's really thinking about and knowing your competition and knowing how you're different to them or better than them. So today we're going to go through 4 key takeaways. And these takeaways are more just ways of thinking about when you're approaching a situation of a saturated market, how you can position yourself or what you could be thinking about in that saturated market to establish your brand, your product or service. So number 1, target audience. I go on about target audience over and over again, but honestly, this is the most important thing you can know for business, for marketing, whatever you're doing, is understanding your target audience. So to give you an example of brands that are really established with their target audience that you may be familiar with. So if you think of Bumble is a dating app focused on women being the initiator or the ones that are actually interacting. So if people connect, the woman has to accept the connection or send the first message. Another one which I love was Monzo. Monzo is a British digital bank or online bank, and they had such a good way of positioning and knowing the target audience they wanted to go after, being the younger generation that wanted more online banking, the digital banking experience. And they did such a big build up as well, and about referral and refer a friend to get more target audience on board, because the more you refer people, the more you got ranked up in the queue, and you're more likely to refer people that you know in your network would also want that brand. Another one is Dollar Shave Club, so a subscription service for people that want grooming products, so razors and all kind of grooming items sent to them. Again, really understanding your target audience. This is one way of thinking of any saturated market, really understanding your target audience, really knowing what they want, and essentially niching down on that target audience. So not going after the masses, going after a very, very specific audience. Then number 2, if we're thinking about brand positioning. So how are you actually establishing your brand in the market? If you're thinking about your target audience, what are they wanting to feel and see and be about your brand? So you may think about the lifestyle that people are going to have, or what you want them to imagine they would have when they are part of your brand community. Brands that are really good at doing this, if you think of like Lululemon, it's a lifestyle around wearing Lululemon clothing. Another one from a brand positioning, if you think of a disruptive brand, back in the day was Dyson. So Dyson really disrupted the vacuum market, and the way he positioned Dyson being a more premium and a vacuum that you can see through, you know, seeing your dirt. Another example might be Tesla. Again, electric cars and electric vehicles existed, but actually Tesla positioned themselves at the forefront and disrupting technology around it. So really thinking about your brand positioning for your target demographic and how you want people to feel and how you want them to do. And again, this goes back to establishing your brand against your competitive. So this is where you'd really think about your competitive edge as part of your brand positioning. Number 3, agility to adapt. So this can go with new brands. Obviously, a lot of times if you're going into a new market, you can be a lot more agile with your positioning and adapting to market trends. Or if you're an established brand, you may be using it as the ability to adapt and evolve with more flavors. So one brand that I always think of that has lots of different flavors, that constantly kind of comes up and keeps up with trends, is Kit Kat and Coca-Cola. There's lots of new flavors of what's happening in the market. Or even Walker's Crisps, a very British example. But the other ones to think about that I suppose adapted to markets and understanding and seeing those markets was Airbnb. So the fact that you could rent your house out to people and people could rent that space instead of a hotel. The same with Spotify, the same with Netflix. All of those brands, Peloton, you know how Peloton bikes became very, very popular, obviously during COVID. Again, adapting to markets. I know Peloton existed before COVID, but adapting to market trends and being more versatile in that positioning. So like I said, this is very much a new brand. It's a lot easier, or an established brand, they may use it in terms of other flavors, other variations. And then the final one really to think about is in terms of how you want to position a saturated market. Number 4 is authenticity. So this really comes down to your brand values. There may be certain brand values where you want to build that trust. And I suppose you could loop this really into your target demographic. So what do people really care about? A brand that's really good at kind of establishing themselves in a saturated market based on brand values is Tom's. So you know the shoes Tom's, and you do 1 for 1. Obviously they would have a target demographic, but if you think of it as a masses thing, they are going into a saturated market of shoes, and obviously smaller like pumps. But the fact that when you buy 1 pair of shoes, you're donating 1 pair of shoes, their kind of target demographic or their brand positioning is very much based on value. So people have that value of wanting to give, you know, charity based or giving, paying it forward. The same with if you think of Lush. So Lush is more about no harm for animals and like environmentally friendly products, and Body Shop as well. They have a lot of positioning with eco products. So again, it's that values trust that they're positioning in a saturated market. I suppose all of them, though, I still feel like it loops into your target demographic of understanding, I suppose, what's the hook for your target demographic. But hopefully that gives you kind of some food for thought about saturated markets. And I'm going to say it again. I don't actually think when people say it's a saturated market, it is, because like I said in the beginning, if you've done your homework or you've done your market research or you understand your target customer, then what is a saturated market? Because you've got your niche, or you've got your hook, or you've got your, I suppose, validation of why your product or service would exist. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Engage and Thrive with your host, Taelon, and see you next week.